in sound of today.
Hey there, and welcome back to Tap the Art of Physiotherapy. I'm Kryczka, sport physiotherapist. This video is going to go through grip strength and what you can do to help develop grip strength, whether you're a no-gi competitor, a gi competitor, or you're just trying to come back from an injury and just get back to doing any kind of training. So it was quite interesting for me because recently I got armbarred, and it was a really different kind of armbar. I was trying to do a reverse hitchhiker escape, and I got caught in a weird position, and they ended up actually injuring my lateral collateral ligament. And typical arm bars, when you get caught in an arm bar, you extend the elbow and you'll actually end up disrupting the ulnar collateral ligament, or the ligament that crosses over top of the radial head. And so what was interesting for me, and it sounds weird, like, you get injured, but it's interesting, but from a physio perspective, I have to kind of help myself out. And it was neat to be on the patient side of things and really see exactly what happened in this injury. And anytime you have an injury, the first thing you have to try and do is regain normal range of motion. Now, I was lucky in this particular injury because I did have full range of motion after the injury. I tapped at, like, when the joint popped once. I didn't let it get too far, where you see some competitors, especially like in a competition, they'll just let it keep going and going. And that's where you end up disrupting the joint integrity. And that is obviously going to compromise range of motion and all those kind of things. So I was quite lucky. I was just in training. I was just being a little silly and I got caught. And so it ended up, again, injuring the lateral collateral ligament. So it was a little bit loose side to side motion, but really, like, there was not even any pain. But what it did do was actually, I guess for lack of a better word, disable my ability to supinate my arm using my muscles. So I lost all power going palm down to palm up rotation. And because of that, I noticed that it drastically impaired my grip strength, which is super important both with jiu-jitsu and my job as a physio. So again, I came up with a lot of these things that we're going to discuss in this video because it was the process that I had to go through to get back to being relatively normal in terms of arm strength, forearm strength, and grip strength. So again, the first thing I had to do, because I had full range of motion, is I could focus on regaining that palm down to palm up rotational strength. And as I've discussed in another video, we want to start with the elbow in a bent position and rotate over the pinky to try and lengthen the band. Okay, and it can be whatever resistance you're at. When I first did it, I mean, it was so weak, I literally had to move my hand back and forth because I couldn't even overcome the resistance of the band. And so I started with, again, at that 90-degree bend, and I also then started to work towards that straight position. And that's what I see clinically that most people complain of outside of the jiu-jitsu world, that they have a problem reaching out and grabbing things because the rotator cuff gets significantly weaker the rotator cuff of the elbow gets significantly weaker as you straighten the elbow. And so again, I would always, work on this 90-degree bend, rotation, and work towards straight elbow and get that rotation. And I did that, but again, was something that was new to me was even considering what I had to do with the rotator strength of the elbow, bending my elbow more so. And I noticed that because I'd go to do up a zipper on a jacket and I couldn't do it. So then it got me thinking, well, I obviously clearly need to also work on this supinator strength with a bent elbow. And the more bending, the weaker it was. And it's important in jiu-jitsu because if I'm fighting off an aggressive side control or half guard where they've got a cross face, I have to try and be able to get my elbow in here with a really bent elbow and try to frame out. And that uses a lot of rotational control as well as like just flexing, which I couldn't do. So that's the first part. Again, I had full range, then I work on the rotator cuff strength, and I start at 90 degrees and I work straight, and then I also work into a more bent position with that rotational strength. In this particular case, it was palm down to palm up supination, which is the more common one that we see. So then once I had that rotator cuff strength back of the elbow, then we have to start looking at the strength of the wrist and the fingers. The muscles of the fingers that flex and the wrist that flex and the wrist that extends and the fingers that extend all end up in the elbow. So there's actually very few little muscles that are in the hand. And so the other thing that you have to start with is making sure that you have full movement of your fingers, which sounds weird because, again, if I injure my elbow, why would I have an impairment of my fingers? But what's really bizarre is that all these intrinsic muscles require this fine-tuned control. And so what we have to try and do with these intrinsic muscles, is what they're called, is we have to work on trying to get them flexing at, say, the finger, or at the MCP or the main knuckle, and staying straight at the other two. And then we try to get this sort of an open fist, is what it's called. So it's flexed at these two and straight at this one. And then we have to work on being straight at the MCP and flexed at these two, like what I call a tiger paw, and then up. So we start to create this, what's sort of called like a tendon gliding, and making sure that we run through this lumbrical grip, an open fist, a tiger paw, and open. And obviously you can put the closed fist in there as well. But we're going sort of in like this particular rotation, and then we can do in reverse. And it's important to do that because, again, remember that we're under active control of the fingers. And if we can't do that, then it's really difficult to then step up into some of the things I'm going to show you here that uses resistance. Okay, so again, remember we've got full motion of the elbow. We want to get full rotator cuff of the elbow, the strength of the rotator cuff, as well as tendon gliding and finger movements, some of these fine-tuned movements that do get lost. So the next step up that we want to do, most people think about getting like a stress ball. And I'm not a fan of these stress balls. There's really not much to them. Because the way that gripping actually works is we don't just sit here and squeeze. There's usually a purpose to it. And so instead of using a stress ball, I'd recommend just taking a towel and balling it up. And then if I'm going to be doing just like a gentle grip, again, because this is still fairly early in that injury state, and let's say I just want to work on just some like wide open grips, I take a towel, roll it up into a ball, and then you'll see that if I add tension to this towel, it's almost like you get into this higher level of a grip, like grip on demand. And that's how it works in real life. I mean, very rarely am I grabbing something and then not doing something with it. I'm not lifting, or pulling, any of those kind of things if I'm just sitting here and gripping. So, you'll see some people where they want to work on grip strength, they'll take a towel and loop it through, say like a kettlebell, and they can work on, again, that kind of grip strength like so. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Whether you have an object pulling on the towel or you're just pulling on the towel in different directions, it still garners more grip strength in an isometric position, and is still fairly low on the stress level to the hand and the elbow and whatnot. Okay, so and if you want to work on an actual just pure gripping, this one is called the gripprotrainer.com. It's just a circular kind of rubber thing, and they come in different thicknesses. You can order them online. Again, I'm not a super fan of this. Like, I put this in my car and I'll kind of use it if I'm sitting at red light and whatnot. But again, this is not how we develop grip strength. This is how we work on finger flexion grip strength, but that's usually not the weak link. The weak link is usually on the finger extenders and on the adductors. Okay, and we're going to get into that in a sec, but I'm going to start with the finger extenders, and then we'll get into some of the adductors, and then we'll get into some of the big boy grip strength training. So the first one that I recommend people use to help with their finger extenders is you just take a bucket of rice, and this is about $5 worth of bulk rice and a container of ice cream. So if you don't have a bucket, there's your benefit. You get to go out and have a bucket of ice cream, and then you get to work it off with some finger strength. But essentially what we're trying to do here is I want to take the hand and plunge it into the rice, and I'm doing this sort of flushing motion. Okay, it's really important that you flush. again, we're trying to incorporate both the wrist extenders and the finger extenders. And it looks like this, okay? It's not meant to be high resistance. It's meant to be for endurance. And again, we always want to make sure that as we're developing grip strength, that we keep the resistance at an appropriate level and we can build up endurance before we start to ramp up the resistance. And because that's where we're going to see failure. It's going to cause other muscles to kick in, and then we end up with an injury on top of a recovering injury, or an injury if you're just trying to work on grip strength. So again, we come back to this. There's a flushing motion. Notice I have a bent elbow to start with. As I get better, I do it with a straight elbow, and I'm flushing that rice. If I am coming back from a particular finger injury, like a finger dislocation or a fracture or something like that, again, make sure that you start to work on that range and getting that back. But this is a really nice transition towards getting stronger because I can get resistance in every direction. So if I plunge my finger into the rice, I can do flexion and extension. I can do side to side, circles, alphabet if you want. It doesn't really matter what you do, but you just want to get endurance of that. And again, respect the fact that if I'm doing this with a bent elbow, I may have to also do that with a straight elbow to make it a little bit more complicated. So then the next sort of progression here, once we've developed some finger extension endurance, we want to start to work on some finger strength. And again, at this point, I'm still talking the extenders. We'll get into the adductors in a second. So there's some of these kind of neat little silicone gadgets you can get on Amazon or some other websites. And they definitely change in resistance, but essentially what it is an elastic with other little loops that go around your fingers just so that it stays in place. And I'm trying to go from this kind of pinched position and I open up. Now this one's quite light, but again, if I have a particular finger that I'm working on, you can isolate it. So if I'm working on the thumb, I can just have the thumb moving and I can go kind of side to side. It has its purpose. But I definitely wouldn't go out of your way to purchase these if you're low on funds. You can literally use a normal elastic and do the same thing. And if it feels like it's sliding, you just kind of help it out with your other fingers. And just make sure that you keep the elastics quite light. Stay away from broccoli elastics. They're really, really resistant and you'll end up with just an irritation of the fingers. So those are some extenders. So again, we start with the rice and then we work on strength with some of these elastic type devices to work on the extenders. Now, as we start to work on the adductors, those are the intrinsic muscles of the hand. They live in the palm or on the backside in the same kind of area. What we can do is take some putty. You can use Play-Doh. It might be a little bit too soft, but this stuff right here is called Theraputty. It comes in different resistances. And again, I'm sure there's different brands. This is just one I use in the clinic. But the benefit of using this kind of sideways motion is that when I make a fist, I have to have my fingers come together and then clamp. It's impossible to make a fist and keep your fingers apart. So obviously then, one of the prerequisites to developing proper grip strength is that I have strong adduction of the fingers, okay? And so what you can do with this is you can just roll it into a little bit of a cylinder and then just pinch sideways. And it's actually quite hard. It's amazing how hard this is because it's not something that we do on a regular basis. But again, this is the whole point, is that we're trying to find different methods to work on strengthening our hand and our forearm. You can also do it with a thumb. Again, thumbs are a little bit different just because they have a different angle than the rest of the fingers. So fingers, the nail beds go this way, the thumb, the nail bed goes this way. So if we're doing adduction, we actually want to tilt our hands sideways so that if I'm going to try and work on this sideways motion of the thumb, see how my hand is sideways, but my thumb is actually kind of going the nail bed is perpendicular to the ground right now. So this is a proper sideways motion. This is not a proper sideways. This is flexion of the thumb. And so if I'm trying to work on that, I can take this Theraputty and just work on squeezing. And this is really important for people who have had thumb dislocations or thumb fractures. And it's really important for no-gi grappling because we, for the most part, want to keep our thumbs relatively tucked in, especially if you're recovering from an injury, so it doesn't get caught and then kind of torqued outwards. But I pretty much have moved to training just no-gi for the sake of protecting my fingers. I find that with a lot of the grabbing of the gi, the tips of my fingers get torqued sideways and you'll see a lot of arthritic fingers. And so I've moved to no-gi and really work on some of these kind of sloth grips or monkey grips where you keep the thumb tucked in and you're trying to work on this kind of grip. And I like that because then you're using anatomical landmarks to grab, and it also kind of better controls the body in a push-pull kind of motion. So again, once we've got the elbow strong and the fingers are getting stronger, now we want to start to work on some isometric grip strength, because that is really what we need to depend on in grappling. And so the first one that I like to start with is just taking a kettlebell, and you're gonna grab it again in that kind of monkey or kind of sloth grip, as I like to call it. But I'm trying to grab this and just hold, okay? So the weight wants to drop out. This one's got texture to it, so it's a little bit easier. Some of them are very shiny and they're really hard to grab, especially if you're slippery in the palm. But we just hold here, and you can also challenge it by straightening your arm. It's way harder again as soon as I straighten that elbow. And I can also even just work on little circles or those kind of things. Again, we're not trying to necessarily work on wrist extension in this particular one, which is totally valid, but I just want to make sure that we're working on that isometric grip strength, okay? So this is one that I started with because you can find any particular weight that you can handle, and you're just barely above the ground and just practice gripping it, and then if it falls, it's no big deal. Okay, the next progression of this, I actually have a fingerboard, like a climbing fingerboard, and they've got these large jugs on them, so you get this nice curved grip. And ideally what you want to do is straight arm hang with active shoulders, so I'm not lazy through the shoulders, I'm actively holding that. And I try to hold that for about 30 seconds to a minute. And obviously if you're tired because of training or work or whatever, then I'll just sort of make sure that my feet touch the ground just enough so that I can stay there, but I'm only gripping as much as I can handle. And as you fatigue, then you start to work down to less and less grips, almost like I've got someone's grip and they're slowly peeling it away. So the fingerboards, they've got these large jugs and they've got these kind of more slopey ones. And again, those are the ones that we really want to try and work on. I don't care too much about the fine finger flexion grips that you'll see in climbing, because that's not really a sustainable or usable grip in jiu-jitsu. We really want to try and have this essential like wrist flexion, finger flexion, very strong grip, and work on holding that. Okay, and that's especially for no-gi, but again, I use it in the gi as well, just to try and avoid grabbing the gi unless I absolutely have to. So the other one that we want to look at that I've kind of played with is if I'm going to work on grips for the gi, I actually took an old gi and cut the bottom off the lapel here. And I took this nylon webbing to a shoe repair guy, and they have much more robust sewing machines, and they can sew through really thick material, and did a really good job. Like it's really professionally done. But essentially what I can do here is I can take this and either loop it over a hook, or I can feed this through itself if I'm trying to say hang this on like a normal chin-up bar. And so it ends up kind of tying it up like this, and then I can hang off these particular grips, okay? And the whole point of these grips is that I can work on isometric holds of grabbing the collar. I can also use it to fold this over and get a proper grip of a cuff or a sleeve. And again, whether I'm doing this as a sustained hold or whether I'm doing it as a chin-up, which I think is very, very challenging, but obviously like it depends on where you are here. Like if you're a competitive gi athlete, you should be able to do chin-ups, especially grabbing the high collar grip. okay? And if you're not there, then you start to work on isometric holds. You can even then take something like this. So all I did was hook up some tubing to this, and then I can work on just doing like a row motion, you know, or however you choose to do it, right? And we're working on some of these forearm grips, but making sure that we actually have the proper grip that we're trying to train. And most of the time in jiu-jitsu, unless you're doing spider guard, you should be spending a lot of your time grabbing like the major lapel. As soon as you start grabbing the sleeve and cuff, it's really hard on the fingers, much like those climbing grips on a climbing board, and that's where you start to get arthritic fingers over the years. And if you ever want to see what arthritic fingers look like in jiu-jitsu, just look up the Meow brothers. They are famous for having the most just arthritic fingers you could ever have at such a young age, and it's because of trauma. And then the last thing that I wanted to kind of talk about was I found this new device, and it's actually been around for a while, and I just sort of never really took to it. But essentially what it is called a Powerball grip trainer, and it's a gyroscope. So it's a ball inside of a ball, and you just get it going. And so I'll show you here. We'll get it going, and then once you get it going, you just sort of create this circular motion. And it's actually easier to get it going with your eyes closed, because you can kind of feel, how do I generate speed and power through this thing? But again, you'll see here it starts to kind of glow, and I'll just kind of show the camera here what that looks like. Okay, but as you get going, hopefully you can hear, it really does generate a lot of force. And if I just leave my hand still, it actually kind of wants to almost move it around in a weird way. My job is to either work on circular clockwise or counterclockwise or up and down. And again, if you think of the principles we've talked about, you start with a bent elbow, you can go straight elbow, you can go fully flexed elbow, you can again go up and down, side to side, or circles. But it's really good for endurance, and we're trying to work again on that sloth grip versus handling it sort of like an orb, okay? But anyways, so with all these kind of things, I think there's a lot of opportunity for grip strength, but we really want to make sure that we come back to the fundamentals of making sure that you have full range of motion of your elbow and wrist, making sure that you work on the rotator cuff strength of the elbow, and then we start to work on some of these movements of the fingers, making sure that we can then start to work on some of the extender strength and the adductor strength, and then finally, we can work on the flexors. Do yourself a favor and step outside of what you think you should be doing of just gripping and gripping and gripping to get that grip strength going, and work on all these other factors, and you'll see that your grip strength improves drastically, especially if you're coming from an injured state. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you again for your time, and I'll see you on the mat soon.